So up until now, we've talked about the slope of a graph, which talks about how the slope moves, and we represent slope with the letter M. Now we're going to start talking about the Y-intercept of the graph, and the Y-intercept tells us where the line crosses the Y-axis. So first of all, the first part of a definition of the Y-intercept is the point on a graph where the graphed line crosses the Y-axis. So that would look like this. Okay, I have a graph here, and there's a line. Where it crosses Y is going to be my Y-intercept. So if I'm looking at a graph, I look for where it crosses the horizontal axis, Y. That's going to tell me what my Y-intercept is. Okay? So on a graph, it's the point where the graph line crosses the Y-axis. In an equation, it's represented with the letter B in Y equals mx plus b. So as an example, maybe we have Y equals negative 6x minus 7. Okay? So the slope would be negative 6, and the Y-intercept would be negative 7. Okay? So we have the point on the graph where it crosses the Y-axis, and then we have the B in Y equals mx plus b, and that's one of the letters that's going to represent the Y-intercept. The last one is the value of Y when x equals 0. So if we look right here in a table, we're going to look for the row where x is 0, and the y, and we're going to look for the y that matches it. So in this case, the y-intercept is 0, 3, or 3. When they ask me for, well anyway, in this set of ordered pairs, I'm going to look for the one that starts with 0, with the 0 in the x, and then I'm looking for the y value. So in this case, the coordinate for the y-intercept is 0, 5. The value of the y-intercept in an equation would be 5. Okay? We'll also talk about what that looks like in situations, but we're going to kind of focus more on, we're really going to be focused for this test, we're focusing on the graph and the table. That's the skill that we're practicing on this test, but we're going to do more of this in the next unit. All right, now let's get these pink notes, and we're going to kind of briefly review slope, but we're going to be focused on y-intercept. And we're actually not going to do these. I'm going to leave these for you to do on your own, and then I'll give you the answers in class if you want them. But we're going to focus on graph, table, equation, on how we find the y-intercept, and we're going to briefly review slope. Okay? So as we remember, when we look at a graph, we're going to find slope by doing rise over run. So let's zoom in on this guy here. So to do our rise over run, now you have to be careful. So I'm going to look for points that I think this line crosses through. So I think it goes through there, and there, and there, and there. And before I prove it to myself, I'm going to rise and run, and I should have the same rise and run every time. So I'm going to fall 2, run 3, I'm on the line. I'm going to fall 2, 1, 3, I'm on the line. Fall through 2, run 3, I'm on the line. That means this is my correct slope triangle. Okay? So if I put rise over run, I get negative 2/3. Remember, I know this is negative because my little dude's going downhill. Okay? So that means my slope is negative 2/3. Now, if I want to look at my y-intercept, all I do is I look for the point where this crosses the y-axis, and I see the line crossing the y-axis right there. The coordinate of that equation is over 0, up 7, or you might just say, like some questions will ask you to write it as 7. I want you to write it as a coordinate, but just recognize they may only ask you for this number. I want you to write it as a coordinate because later on we're going to do these things called x-intercepts or zeros, and the x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis, and you write those. So like, for example, if the x-intercept was 10, we'd write it as 10, 0. So that's going to change the way we write the ordered pair. Remember, we always move side to side first and then up and down. So I go over 0, up 7. That's why the ordered pair is 0, 7. So that's my y-intercept. Okay? Now, if I look at this equation, okay, if I pick 2 points on this one, my rise over run, do I rise? Well, I rise 3, but I'm not going side to side at all. Well, 3 over 0 is no, which means I have undefined slope, and I had to put a dash there because it was a little too long. Okay. Now, if I look for my y-intercept on undefined lines with undefined slope, am I going to find a y-intercept? Well, no, I'm not, because these two lines, if I look at them this way, these two lines are parallel. Here, look. Oh, yeah, parallel. They're parallel. They're never going to cross. So for undefined slope, my y-intercept, there is none. Okay? Now, for slope, if this was a horizontal line instead, the horizontal line would cross here, and then wherever it crossed the y-axis, I would still be looking there for my y-intercept. Okay? And then briefly, let's look at this one. Okay, first of all, I see a point here, and then there, and then there. So let's look at these two. I rise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I run 2. That means my slope works out to be 3. Okay. Now when I look for my y-intercept, I see it right there at, once again, wait a minute, what am I doing? That's wrong. It's right here. I'm sorry, I lost my mind. I was like, why is it at 7? Because it's not. The line crosses right here. Just pretend that didn't happen. I am so sorry. And my slope, my y-intercept is 0, 1. Okay, I don't know what just happened there, y'all. It's not Taco Tuesday. I have no excuse. Okay, so on a graph for y-intercept, we're just briefly reviewing slope. What we're looking at here, we're focusing on y-intercept, and my y-intercept is where it crosses. Here it crosses at 0, 1. Here it's never going to cross. Here it crosses at 0, 7. Okay, so I'm looking for where it crosses the y-axis. All right, now in a table, now none of these have a y-intercept. But I'm going to tell you what the y-intercept of these tables is. We're going to add a row 0, 8 to this one. To the second one, we're going to add a row 0, 3. And to this last one, we're going to add a row, oh my gosh, that is the craziest looking, 0, -2. Okay? Now, for these, all I look for, so if I find my slope, I can find my slope pretty simply, just like we always do. We're going to do delta y over delta x on this one. So for this one, I'm going to, 17 minus 6 is 11, -12 plus 8 is -4. That makes my delta y over delta x -6 over 8, which reduces to -3/4 or -0.75. Okay. Now, my y-intercept is the row, just like we said in our notes. It's the row where x is 0. So that's my y-intercept, which means that my b is 0, 8. Okay? Let's look at this next one. Okay? I have plus 0 plus 6. That means my delta y over delta x is 0 over 6. 0 divided by 6 means my slope is 0. I also suspect that because all my y's are the same, that means I have 0 slope. If I want to find my y-intercept, again, I just look for that row where x is 0, and that means my y-intercept is 0, 3. Okay? It's so easy to find in a table. Okay, now the slope for this one, again, I don't like that one. I'm going to go down here. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 plus 2 is 5. Delta y over delta x is 2 over 2, which means my slope is 1. If I want to find my y-intercept, again, now it's not always going to be, obviously, it's not going to be written here. You'll have to look in the row table for it, but you look for the row where x is 0. So that means my y-intercept is 0, -2. Okay? Now, the easiest one, as far as I'm concerned, is when it's what's in an equation form. Now this one's a little weird because there's no slope on this one, right? So if I don't have slope listed, that means, so if all you see is y equals something, that means my slope is 0. So my slope is 0, okay, because my slope is whatever's in front of the x. My y-intercept is whatever number is by itself. So it's the b in this y equals mx plus b or minus b equation. So it's whatever number is by itself. We also call that number the constant. Okay? b equals -5. Well, actually it's 0, negative 5. Okay, let's look at this next one. Okay, we have y equals negative 5/4 x plus 2. So whatever's in front of the x is my slope. So that means my slope is negative 5/4. Okay, my y-intercept is my constant, or the number that's by itself. That means my b is 0, 2. Okay, and in this last equation here, y equals 6x plus 5, so my slope is whatever number is in front of the x. Okay, well, let me circle that. And my okay, that pen jumped out of my hand. My y-intercept is whatever number is by itself, which is 0, negative 5. All right, we're going to practice this. Primarily on the test, you're going to be responsible for graphs and tables, but this was an easy teach, so I thought we'd go through with it. If you want to do these three examples, I'll give them to you, but we've, you know, if you need the extra practice, I'll give you the answers to them. And we're going to practice more situations, more finding slope and y-intercept today.